Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review. I'm Hovik Manucharyan, and this week we're going to talk about the following major topics: elections recap in Armenia, and protests in Artsakh. To talk about these issues, we have with us Emil Sanamyan, a senior research fellow at USA's Institute of Armenian Studies, specializing in politics in the Caucasus, and Hrant Mikaelian, who is a political scientist and multidisciplinary researcher in social sciences at the Caucasus Institute based in Yerevan. This episode was recorded on June 27, 2021. Hello and welcome, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
Today is June 27. I guess it's 7 days after the elections in Armenia. The Central Electoral Commission, or the CEC, was supposed to hear any complaints and deliver the final results of the elections or certify the results, as well as do a count or calculation of the mandates for each party, which happened earlier in the day in Armenia. So according to this, the Civil Contract Party received 71 mandates, Armenia Alliance or Ayastan Dashing received 29 mandates, and Fatih Vunem Alliance received 7 mandates in the new, or would receive 7 mandates in the new parliament. So for a total of 107 seats. Emil, can you summarize what happened over the last week and where we are?
What happened last week? Well, we had the election and the party of power won. This has been the case in Armenia since independence. The party that is in power, that controls levers of power such as police, prosecutor's office, the local government, wins typically. This was, of course, an unusual election in that Armenia came in with considerable shocks related to the war, the humiliation that continues, derives from the end of this war. And it appeared that there was a strong candidate, a strong opposition candidate, whom many expected to win, Robert Kocharian, the ex-president. However, for reasons that I'm sure Hrant will also discuss, this did not happen. And again, this is a recurring theme in Armenian politics, where former leaders of Armenia make comebacks, political comebacks, just Kocharian did, and before him, Hrant Bedrossian and Karin Demircian did. They are strong political comebacks, they rise as main political challengers, but it's not enough to overcome whatever the party in power defenses are there, and also the negative ratings that they bring along with them, because of course prior to becoming challengers they had their terms, and there's plenty of dissatisfaction with the things they didn't do or did, and that was the case with their predecessors as well, with Bedrossian and Demircian, and Kocharian wasn't able to convince a sufficient number of people to support him. Especially the key thing was convincing key people inside the police, inside the prosecutor's office, inside the local government, which something that Bedrossian more actively tried to do in 2008. If you remember, they were trying to get people to resign from the government, to defect. In this case, we didn't really have that much of an effort to overcome the administrative resource, the power resource. So that's kind of the general overview.
Hrant, wanted to get your opinion as well. Also understand, we've been frequently citing various polls, and the ones that we cited all seem to at least, not predict as such a unexpected result as we had. Some, for instance, the MPG poll showed that Kocharian was actually leading. So why the discrepancy between the polls? And also, what do you think this mix of mandates will give the opposition? What will give the party in power in the new parliament, and how that fight is going to take shape?
Thank you. First of all, I want to fully agree with Emil. This time it seemed there is competition, there is real competition, but in reality, as we can see from the result, the defeat by Pashinyan, Kocharian's defeat, is very shameful, and it is obvious. And some people around Kocharian say that, okay, we expect there can be some irregularities. They expect it to be a big number, but even though there is nothing that might change the final outcome, that the civil contract is a lot ahead. On my side, I can say that yet I have not seen many data on irregularities. There were some recalculation of around 1,500 votes, but still it's not enough to state that there might be serious problem with this election. So finally we see that people voted for Pashinyan, and here's really big question: why? You're right, we had this data from MPG that and in final poll it was that Kocharian might win and that he is ahead. I tried to bring several explanations why the poll and voting did not match. First of all, the opinion polls cannot predict the result of the votes. This is important because, for example, in US sociology, they have raw data on political ideologies or on political preferences, and then they have likely voters. So if we disaggregate Armenian voters in the MPG poll, and if we look at who is going to vote and who is not going to vote, we will see that a vast majority of Pashinyan supporters were strongly for voting, while a very significant share of Kocharian voters did not have intention to participate in voting process. The same referred to all parties except Pashinyan. So I can bring you numbers. About 87 or something percent of Pashinyan supporters were going to vote, while some 57% of Kocharian supporters were going to vote, and some 50% of Pativunem or I Have a Honor blog were going to vote. So this is one thing which changes the shape of result on the first instance. Second thing is that the opinion poll was conducted in 14 to 15 June, and the voting was on 20th of June. And the difference is that 5-6 days, many things happened.
Right.
Which I assume increased approval rate of Pashinyan, and I have some not very exact data, but still there is some data which supports this idea that Pashinyan support was growing very quickly in last days. First is that he brought 15 prisoners of war from Azerbaijan in exchange of the landmines map. Second is that he participated in debates where Robert Kocharian did not participate. Third is a very active media campaign in social media. There were several small videos against Kocharian which were disseminated on Facebook by advertisement to an audience of about 700,000 each, and this also affected the result. Then there was a very active campaigning, rallying in different places of the country. Then Pashinyan was able to visit Munich, which fixed his approval rate there as well.
If I can go back for a moment to the MPG polls, their track record, of course, and the track record was pretty good. Particularly 2018 elections, they were able to estimate within 1 or 2 percentage points results. But really, I should have looked more closely at their polls from 2017 election, where they were basically estimating at the time like a statistical tie between Republicans and Bargavac at the time, and Republicans ended up getting much closer to 50% towards the end. And that discrepancy was very similar to discrepancy this time around, where basically a party in power is capable of mobilizing the part of the electorate that is available to be mobilized. This is a fairly large number of people who work for the government or serve in the army, and they do bring in a considerable number of votes that elevate overall number for the party in power. And I believe that's what happened in 2017 for the Republicans, and this is what happened this time around as well. And even if we look at the trend in the MPG polling, this time around, they showed that Pashinyan's numbers were declining up until about 10 days before the election when they started climbing. So even though they were showing a statistical tie in the sample that they had, they were also showing that Pashinyan's numbers were growing around the same speed as Kocharian's number, essentially. And compared to previous week's trends, it was already a positive trend for Pashinyan in that very last poll that they conducted. So I wouldn't dismiss the MPG polling as inaccurate. As a matter of fact, they were accurate in terms of predicting the parties that made it into the fact that, say, Serge Sargsyan's bloc was doing better than Bargavac. Which was not predicted by some of the other pollsters. And in general, they were able to capture public mood outside of the sort of the highly mobilized groups. And the highly mobilized groups might be like I said, people who have a direct stake in this, people in the government, their family members, etc.
And they actually predicted the turnout, right? Because they, in their polling, they had like 50% who would very likely win, and that was the actual turnout.
Yeah. So I wouldn't dismiss their numbers as all that inaccurate. As a matter of fact, they were largely accurate. But again, considering that there are some groups that are generally apolitical and are subject to considerable government influence, as they were in the previous government, under the previous government, they are still
By
today.
the way, for our listeners, I'd just like to let them know that on June 21st, we had a podcast with Aram Navasardzian from MPG to talk about any differences in terms of the polling and actual results. And you can, it's on our channel, so you feel free to go and check that out as well.
And of course, the big issue, the defeat in the war, and the issue of sovereignty around Artsakh. Not just Armenian sovereignty over Artsakh, but Armenian sovereignty over itself, Armenia, right? Over many years, Armenia was able to exercise its sovereignty by controlling Artsakh in defiance of Russia, in defiance of the West. There was not a major amount of pressure, but the positions were clearly different, right? The Russian position was clearly different from the Armenian one, and by maintaining that position, Armenia was clearly exercising its sovereignty vis-à-vis Russia as well, not just other countries.
Right.
Now, as a result of this war, Armenia has surrendered its sovereignty to Russia. Essentially, on foreign policy, defense policy, doesn't have a sovereign policy anymore. And I think as people who are kind of invested into these issues of politics, political analysis, we tend to exaggerate the significance of this for the general public. And the general public, it seems to me, is okay with this. There is not a great deal of support for Armenia's independence in Armenia at this point. It seems, the pro forma part of it, yes, there's support for it, but for actual independence and sort of bearing the cost of independence is not there in Armenia. So this was a significant aspect of that informed the outcome of this election. People are okay giving up their sovereignty to Russia and forgetting about the humiliation that the Armenian army suffered, as long as things are more or less okay for Yerevan and for surrounding area. And of course, by the time they might not be okay, there might not be a chance or a choice. But there's a fairly short-term agenda there.
Do you think people made a conscious decision? Did they have all the facts in front of them to be able to?
I think so. This conscious decision wasn't just made, right? I mean, if we look at what the extent of the involvement of the Armenian people was in the First Karabakh War, it was not much different from today. Even if you look at the total number of people killed, basically as many Armenians from Republic of Armenia died in Karabakh from 1991 to 1994 as they died in this 44-day war. This is a very, Hrant looked at those numbers as well. He's informed of those numbers. There is the ability to sort of the amount that can be invested in terms of fighting for Artsakh, as was not very different from the early 90s as was this time around. And also the number of people who are ready to sacrifice and for reasons of, either as volunteers, as reservists, or as active duty, has not changed significantly. So I think that's the reality that needs to be appreciated, that in Armenia, overall, the demand is still for Pashinyan-style politics is still there, and the demand for sovereignty is not there to the extent that people might assume.
Hrant, based on the numbers that we have today, with 71 seats out of 107, I think that the Civil Contract Party is just one seat short of a supermajority in parliament, meaning that they have a very comfortable majority to pass laws and most laws. But in order to pass constitutional laws or any first level law that is like a constitutional law, essentially, they would have to, they're one seat short. What do you think this will mean in the upcoming parliament?
Well, at least this parliament would be more diverse than the previous one. In Armenia, we had always a discussion that one opposition is real, another is fake, and so on. This was always a part of a public discourse of Armenia. And
They congratulated
if we
him,
take
right?
into account that many parties in reality took game as a spoilers for the authorities, it might be true this time as well. For example, after the election, many party leaders met Nikol Pashinyan, and they had similar agenda to him, and they congratulated him.
On that note, just quickly, I'm actually doing some research on what was watched on YouTube during the elections, and I was looking at all the videos, the campaign videos for Shirinyan Babajanyan, for instance. And out of the 20 videos that they had, 16 out of them were attacking Kocharian, even though they're campaign videos of their own rallies. And the title, the keyword Kocharian was always in the title of their videos, and it was in a negative way.
Yeah. It did not seem that this is in any way meeting of government and opposition. It was seemed like there is a government and some parties which also support government, and they are opposition to opposition.
This
So
is not new, also, right? I mean, in the past elections, we would always have parties running in the elections that were sort of focused on maybe not necessarily the first on the incumbent, but on the main challenger. This was the case, say, in 2008 elections, when you had a number of candidates who were against Bedrossian more than they were against Serge Sargsyan. This was also the case in other elections. So that's not new. You always have kind of parties that essentially position themselves as junior partners for one side or the other, right? So I wouldn't see that as something new
Right.
in this election.
it's not exactly the same. Yeah, in 2008 there was such party. It was Dashnak Sutun, but not really the same. I mean, if you have some 10 to 15 parties fully attacking the opposition, the main opposition party, I mean, it's kind of weird distribution of political landscape. And also, we saw 25 subjects in the voting list, and out of those, at least half met Pashinyan. I mean, it's not really what we had. I don't remember this. I mean, 2008, I still think it's different.
But look, sorry, Hrant, looking at it from electoral planning, right? All of these parties essentially took votes away from Pashinyan's party. All of this, anti-Kocharian parties, let's call it.
No, I don't
They all
think so.
ended up taking votes away from Pashinyan.
No, I don't think so.
And in my sense of this is that Pashinyan basically eliminated any potential independent actors from within his faction. He could have had, say, Babajanyan in his faction or Sanasaryan in his faction, but he did not. I think this is a reflection of his sort of desire to control the faction, to make sure that there's no defections, to make sure that there's no independent voices that might be different from his. That's how I see it, more than, say, some kind of grand plan for all of these small groups to... I mean, they could have done the same attacks against Kocharian being part of Pashinyan's list, but being on the electoral list, I don't know how many thousands of votes, but they did sort of shave off, a few percentage points off.
No, I have different view. First of all, the people who wanted to vote for Pashinyan, they would vote for Pashinyan, because all those marginal parties, I mean, they are really small. There is no sense to vote for the party which will have, let's say, 0.3 or 1.5% of votes if you have your another favorite, which can win actually. In reality, many of those people who voted for these parties were former electorate of Pashinyan, but who did not want to vote for him this time, because this time they wanted to vote for some kind of opposition, but some kind of different opposition than Kocharian. This is true. But another thing, which is in my opinion very important, is that one thing is that when you have, let's say, combat of, let's say, main opposition versus main government party, and another thing is when you have, let's say, in view of people, majority of parties criticizing one party, which is opposition, and this makes very different approach. It's not that it's only one party criticizing another, but it's whole field criticizing, so everyone cannot be wrong. And it's not all the same also if we count the expenses of the parties, not including the expenses from the state apparatus, which were also big, but Pashinyan's party's expenses on the campaign were the biggest. And if you add up, let's imagine your scenario, if you add up all of those to Pashinyan, there would be a huge difference, which I'm not sure that it is possible to do by law, because there are limitations. I still think it was a grand plan, and I still think it was some kind of joint action. I think this is also visible by how they accepted the results of the elections. They don't have any opinion on that. I mean, they didn't have any idea in participating another than attacking Kocharian. They knew they will not pass, and then they just meet Pashinyan and support him and congratulate him. I think party which is going to take part in the political life of the country does not behave like this. I mean, I really don't
Yeah.
remember this kind of behavior since at least 2008, but beforehand as well. We can remember maybe 95 elections when there was Shamiran below, but that's also a bit different story. I really don't remember something which we can compare to this.
Emil, you seem to imply that the people essentially voted their sovereignty away, but I want to understand what did they vote for. To me, it seems like this was a choice between a referendum on Robert Kocharian, or the fear of Robert Kocharian coming back versus sovereignty, and which one was more important. And it seems like people decided, or at least the electoral technologies framed it in this way, when whoever was running these elections was able to make people believe this. But I don't know if we can compare elections 30 years back to today and make any sort of conclusions about the moral character of the people, or what their political orientation is. It really just too specific from election to election, in my opinion.
Election to election, you always have an incumbent or an incumbent designee, and then you have the opponents, right? I mean, the main challenger. That's what every election cycle since 1995 essentially has been. 1996 has been the case in Armenia. You would always have a fairly strong challenger, with the exception of 2018 election. There was, of course, never an environment, the background to an election such as this one, a defeat in a war that caused so much loss of life and so much loss of homes, economic capacity, etc. A real collapse of statehood, sovereignty. You never had
But do you
that.
think
So,
that people are
like
able
I said,
to objectively evaluate the results of that war? I mean, I think that's what I'm getting at.
well, if they do not, then it's not that significant for them. It's one of the list of things that
Like, for
they
instance, many
sort of care
people
about.
many people care about the results of the war, but if actually, I don't know how significant this is, but when you see the interviews on YouTube of people, they blame the opposition for
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah, there is a group of people who, obviously are unhappy with what happened, but believe that Pashinyan could not really do much about it, and it was because of the corrupt system that he inherited that the outcome came to be what it was. I think that's not a very informed opinion, but it is a view that I think is shared by a number of people as well. But again, it's fairly clear that the fact that there was no rebellion inside the pro-Pashinyan camp. The fact that his political apparatus and the law enforcement apparatus managed to stay intact. The fact that the army ended up kneeling in front of Pashinyan as well and not really caring that much about the fact that they were humiliated primarily because of what Pashinyan basically did with confronting Turkey in this fighting, and basically putting the army in front of a
right.
kind of a train. All of that, I think, adds up to a picture where there is really a minority in Armenia that, and it's not like all voters of Kocharian or what, it's not all of them, but some of the voters for Kocharian, maybe some of the voters for Pashinyan, but it's a minority in Armenia that considers, control over Artsakh or control over Armenia's security or control over Armenia's destiny, all that important from, many other priorities they have.
I mean, I think we talked about the main opposition, which is Party Vunem and Armenia Alliance, having some foothold in the parliament, and I think that there's going to be some realistic fighting on important issues, and they'll be able to present challenges. Given that the Pashinyan lacks supermajority, I believe they'll be able to more hard pressed to pass any constitutional laws, and also the opposition will be able to refer important matters to the constitutional court if need be. But what I wanted to note is that the existing opposition, Prosperous Armenia, which has been in parliament since 2003, since their founding, essentially they're not, for the first time in history, they're not in parliament. There's also the Bright Armenia also lost their spot. What do you think their role is going to be, and what is any lessons learned for them?
As far as I can judge, Bright Armenia will have to find another partner because this time the result is too low. It's 1.2%. It's not giving any chance to return back in a foreseeing future. So it's a terrific result for Bright Armenia, to be frank. Concerning Prosperous Armenia, it's not that bad. It's almost 4%. It's still below the threshold, but they might try to keep the party system and try on the next election if those will be more competitive. I think we still have problem with competitiveness of elections because if you look at European elections, you would not see such big result of winning party. I mean, you would never see on the elections where you don't have two-party system. You would never see result like 54 or 70% for the winning party. I just made a distribution and probability that any European election, I mean Western European election, would have this kind of result, and it's like 1/1000th of a percent. So it shows also that we are very far from being truly democratic, from having plural political system, and it still should be either fight, which we had this time, or it should be, let's say, some kind of consensus. Also, it's important that we have only 3 political parties in the parliament, out of which only 2 have passed the threshold. The third has passed to the parliament because it's limited to at least 3 parties in the parliament. So it shows that we have very weak party system, and if we consider that Kocharyan's bloc, which includes 2 parties and also himself as a leader, is also not a party, we can say that at this time we have only one strong party, which is the civil contract, and which is at this time already not fully a party but more like government as it is. So I think it's a bit hard to say how Armenian party system will look like in some foreseeing future. But at least we will have more plural parliament than the previous one, at least I hope. And I hope also that the ruling party will have to, at least in some occasions, consult to the opposition.
Yeah, this election was very polarized in general, but I was also surprised to see, for instance, Armenian National Congress getting, I think, less than 20,000 votes. Essentially, that is around the number of votes that Hrant Mikaelian's party, Hayot Haydanik, got. And this guy is just basically someone on social media who supported the party. So I think overall, this was like a huge collapse in whatever was left there in terms of ideology in Armenian politics. You know, people essentially chose between 1 or 2 issues. I just wanted to give also an update in terms of what can come up. So according to the opposition spokesperson or Aram Vartavanyan, today essentially are the certified date of certification of elections. However, the opposition has until July 2nd to present any constitutional court challenges. The constitutional court might take a few weeks to hear these complaints, which means that Armenia in reality will not have a new parliament, a new prime minister until the constitutional court is done deliberating, and probably towards the end of July is when we'll know in terms of level set the expectations from people. So we might have a new prime minister sworn in if even sort of the election results are approved by late in July. The constitutional court has 3 outcomes that has 3 potential outcomes as a result of this complaint. One of them is invalidation of the elections. Number 2 is just sort of to approve the results, or essentially deny the complaint. And number 3, I believe, is there's this weird capability of the Constitutional Court to suggest a new way of distributing the mandates. So it will be interesting to see the results. I think that from what I've heard, it doesn't seem likely that the Constitutional Court would do anything to change the existing results. But we still have 3 weeks probably until we're sure of that. Emil, Hrant, anything else you want to add to this discussion before we move on to our next discussion?
I would just point out also the role of the main patron state, Russia, in this election. I think it seemed pretty clear that formally Russia did not want to pick sides. It did not care to sort of support Kocharyan, even though Putin does have a sort of a relationship with Kocharyan that he always touts, and is sort of not very friendly to Pashinyan. But overall, Pashinyan was able to sort of position himself like one of those Gurdjieff, acrobats. I don't know if that reference rings a bell to many people, but he is, basically is ready to go to whatever compromise is suggested by Russia. So that outweighed whatever Kocheryan's personal relationship there was, and Kocheryan was clearly going to be more demanding when it comes to Karabakh and relations with Russia. So that, of course, played an important role for this sort of army of people on the fence, kind of looking to see if Russians really are behind Kocheryan or not. And if they're not, then does it really make much of a difference if Kocheryan is elected? So I think that was also a factor.
Okay, I'd like to move on to our next topic. The previous week, there were apparently spontaneously some protests against Arayik Harutyunyan in Artsakh. And the protests seem to have been triggered by Arayik Harutyunyan's photos where he was in the campaign headquarters of Civil Contract right after the elections, supposedly, I guess, celebrating. There are several different ways we can look at this. So, yes, there was a nascent protest movement against Arayik Harutyunyan even before the war. And I believe that until this time they were sort of quiet. I wanted to understand who are the people who are protesting right now?
Look, there is clearly a lot of anxiety and angst in Karabakh among people there. They feel abandoned by Armenia. They think that they look at the result of this election as another sign of the abandonment. And it clearly is the case. I mean, there is not a big constituency in Armenia for Artsakh at this point. And of course, that is reflected in the sense that Arayik Harutyunyan doesn't effectively speak for Artsakh, which is basically on the precipice of destruction. I mean, if it's something happens with the Russian peacekeeping mission, there is no Armenian army there anymore to defend Artsakh. And this was, I think, sort of that kind of reaction. The photo was Arayik Harutyunyan was at the headquarters of Nikol Pashinyan. But I have to say that up until the election day and up until basically it was clear who won, Arayik Harutyunyan publicly kept away from the election, much more, say, than prior presidents of Artsakh, which would normally lean in on the side of the incumbent power because, of course, they're dependent on the incumbent power support. And that's going back to 1996 election. Kocheryan describes it in his book, for example, how he was sort of recruited, brought into Yerevan to basically support Ter-Petrosyan campaign during 1996 election. This time around, the Arayik's role, I think, maybe have been, at least on the public level, was not as clear. He was obviously much more involved, say, in 2018, bringing people to Pashinyan's protest or the rally. This time around, he sort of kept quiet until the very end. And again, these protests, they're similar to what happened there in 2016 after the change of government in Armenia, in that there's, of course, discontent with Arayik Harutyunyan, but there is no clear leadership and alternative to Arayik Harutyunyan. And I personally haven't seen much from, say, Vitaly Balsanyan or anybody else there who would make it clear to me that there is somebody ready to step in as a leader of Armenia.
What's interesting is that the organizers of the protest movement were speaking, I believe, on social media, and they struck some kind of a deal with Arayik Harutyunyan that, given the sensitive situation around the whole election issue right now, they are going to sort of step back, but they're now seeking the resignation of Vitaly Balasanyan. There's a lot of different kind of rumors. So, I'm wondering whether actually these protests were organized by Arayik Harutyunyan himself. And also, to speak about the sensitivities, essentially, if Arayik Harutyunyan steps down, then all of the parliament has to step down in Artsakh, and new elections have to be launched. And I believe there is a strong chance that Azerbaijan has a more ability this time to prevent any election happening. And I believe they have stated that they would do that in case there are any new elections.
Well, I have a couple of considerations. I'm not too deep in Artsakh politics, but from what I know, I see that Artsakh residents were more willing to see Kocheryan winning, as they would support him. And they did not like Pashinyan winning at all. And presence of Arayik Harutyunyan there made them angry. This is true. Concerning Vitaly Balasanyan, it's not very obvious for me. What role does he play right now? and also it's hard to see is there any
But
alternative.
he's generally seen as Robert Kocharian's supporter in Artsakh. Is that correct?
Not fully, because at some point he supported Kocharian when he was in jail, but it doesn't mean that they are one team. I'm not sure we can refer to them this way. I think it's more that in Artsakh there is a political crisis, which is not very well seen because Artsakh is small, but still there was also a joint statement by 4 parties, if I'm not mistaken, of Artsakh parliament, which demand Arayik Harutyunyan resignation. So it's not only wide public, it's also a parliament which demands Arayik Harutyunyan's resignation. And I agree that there is a problem that, okay, if Arayik Harutyunyan is resigned, who is going to replace him? And there is no clear answer to that. There is no clear alternative leader, no clear alternative structure, and no clear view that the elections are possible. So this is another problem. But on the other hand, it's still hard to expect that people in Artsakh will accept Arayik Harutyunyan's rule. So it will be, I think, unstable situation there long time afterwards as well. Because also it's important that Arayik Harutyunyan, based on objective or subjective reasons, I cannot state for sure, but he will not be able to deliver what people expect to fix major security issues there. So he will be always be seen as a person who shares some kind of responsibility and so on. And this means that he will not be able to fully finish the crisis, the political crisis there. So I think it's kind of yet another act of this crisis.
Another aspect of the crisis, I guess. All right. This was an interesting show. I believe we'll have more on the elections in the coming weeks. As I said, there'll be at least constitutional formally, the results will not be accepted. A new parliament won't be sworn in Armenia, and that will dictate the news cycle in Armenia and beyond, and in Artsakh as well. I wanted to thank our guests, Emil and Hrant, for being here, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Hrant, and bye-bye, Hovik.
Take care.
That concludes our program for this Week in Review episode. We hope it has helped your understanding of some of the issues from the previous week. We look forward to your feedback and your suggestions for issues to cover in greater depth. Contact us on our website at groong.org or on our Facebook page ANN-Groong or in our Facebook group Groong-Armenian News Network. Special thanks to Laura Osborne for providing the music for our podcast. On behalf of everyone in this episode, we wish you a good week. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels, like our pages, and follow us on social media. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.